All right. Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation. I have fond memories of coming to Freiburg for real, because I'm actually originally from Tübingen. So we spent many basketball games coming over with our club and school and so forth. This is coming back, although only virtually for this time. So as Sebastian mentioned, I'm interested in the origins of cooperative behaviors and look at that both in children and in chimpanzees, and in particular, to understand something about human nature. And cooperation is a really important topic to study to understand humans, because our life wouldn't be what we have without our ability to cooperate. And you can see that in simple things like helping someone else out who can't achieve their goal. Our life wouldn't be as nice if it wasn't for this ability, but it's maybe even more fundamental because buildings, for example, require the cooperation of multiple individuals. So if it wasn't for the ability for us to join forces to cooperate towards what's called mutualistic goals that one individual can't do alone, we wouldn't be able to live in these kinds of large dwellings, okay? So it's long been identified, cooperation has long been identified as a critical aspect of human social life. But the question is, where does that come from? Like, what are the origins of these kinds of behaviors? And that's a major question also for people like me, for a psychologist, to understand the psychological capacities, the cognitive abilities, the motivations, everything that makes our mind tick and drives our behaviors. Where do they come from? And a predominant view that I now call the old view is that basically we have to learn all of this, so that by Mother Nature brings out these selfish babies that only care about themselves. And then over time, we add to all this selfishness also our cooperative tendencies. But it is a process of basically reprogramming children from being selfish to being also cooperative. And it is due to social learning, like people telling kids what to do, or kids copying others around them, social experience for you get better along if you're cooperative than when you're not, or internalizing cultural norms that are the main driver behind our cooperative tendencies. So basically the idea is that we're born selfish, and all these external factors, especially human culture, are required, are necessary for cooperative behaviors to emerge. And in this talk, I want to claim that this is wrong. That's the old view. And the new view we should adopt is that kids are rather naive cooperators. So what I want to propose is that we should think of kids as naive cooperators who have some of the basic capacities to cooperate, and they over time become more and more complex, so that kids become more mature cooperators. And obviously, social learning, experience, and cultural norms do play a role. So the argument is not that it's all innate and nothing changes or something like that, but that they play a different kind of role, that they're not necessary for at least basic forms of cooperation to emerge, but they shape how these initial tendencies play out over ontogeny. All right. Okay, so before I zero in on what exactly these factors are, and what are these, what are kids equipped with, I want to zoom out a little bit to ask a bigger question about what is required for cooperation more generally, for kids, for human adults, for actually any kind of cooperator of any animal. And so there are two challenges of cooperation that have been identified. So this comes also from philosophy of biology, that one is that you have to have the psychological capacities, or more generally speaking, the proximate mechanisms in place to generate benefit in the first place. So in other words, you need to know how to cooperate, identify opportunities for cooperation, like this one here, where these two boys have to realize, oh, we can't get to this apple all by ourselves. we need to cooperate in order to get these apples, right? This is not a trivial task from a psychological and behavioral perspective, right? Because they have to coordinate their efforts, probably they have to communicate, and then engage in some kind of division of labor to get to the apples, right? So that's one important aspect of being able to cooperate. And many animals can't cooperate in certain kinds of situations exactly because they don't know how to do all of this, right? They haven't evolved the capacities to generate benefit in this kind of way. Humans do in many different ways. So this is what's so exciting, psychologically speaking. However, so let's imagine that these boys have acquired apples. Another challenge now arises, and this is how you distribute the benefit. So you need to understand when to cooperate. Or am I dealing with someone who's likely to share the apple with me, or just runs away with the apple? In other terms, am I dealing with a free rider or someone who's actually cooperative in the long term? Okay, so this is another aspect of that. So for a mature cooperator, you need to be able to do both. You have to have the psychological capacities to generate benefit, and you have to have the ability to distribute benefit. And when you look at theories of cooperation and different kinds of disciplines, what I noticed is that most claims about human uniqueness, for example, that come from psychologists are focused on the first question, generating benefit. So my own advisor, Mike Tomasello, always talking about the ability to represent shared intentions, that we can do things together. And once you have that ability, boom, all this cooperation explodes, completely ignoring the second problem of distributing benefit. Also, a lot of approaches about empathy, like empathy is driving everything, is just thinking about generating benefit, how you can make someone else feel better, for example, but not thinking about how to weigh costs and benefits. On the other hand, behavioral economics and also game theory more generally is focused also almost exclusively with the second problem, how to distribute benefit, how to safeguard cooperation against free riders. Like if you do like a prisoner dilemma game, there's never a question about how did these resources emerge in the first place? Like how is where is this is the value, how is the value generated in the first place? It's all about how it's being distributed, right? So my claim is then to really understand how we become sophisticated, mature cooperators, we have to identify over ontogeny, what are the capacities to generate benefit and what are the capacities to distribute benefit and how they interact over development, okay? And so the more specific claim I want to make with regard to the development of kids is that there is a dissociation between the kinds of abilities that allow you to generate benefit and that they emerge very early. So abilities to generate benefit through helping others, sharing resources, or collaborating with others, I want to claim and present evidence for that today, already in the second year of life. And that becomes obviously more and more complex, right? We are able to share in more kinds of contexts, like maybe with absent others, or we are able to collaborate not only in dyads, but with multiple people in large teams and so forth. So this is going to become more complex, and that's more manifest in more context. So this is why this arrow is kind of widening. But I want to claim that the basic capacities we can already identify in early childhood. So what about the abilities to distribute benefit? And I want to claim that this is lagging behind a little bit in development, that kids are first able to generate benefit, but they do not yet have the skills in place to solve the other challenge, how to distribute benefit, how to solve the free rider problem. And when that kicks in, depends a little bit on the kind of skill you need or the kind of context. So I want to give 3 examples across the talk. So one is how fairness norms develop. So this is a very good way of weighing costs and benefits and making sure that other people are nice to you and you are nice to other people, right? That we do things in a fair way. When I talk about reciprocity as another form of allowing benefits to be distributed in a way that makes cooperation viable over the long term, and also talk about third-party punishment as a way of people not just regulating how they directly with others are cooperating, but also intervening on how others are cooperating with amongst themselves. All right. Okay. So let's dive right into how we test that in kids. So I want to first show you a series of studies I've conducted on this issue of helping behavior. So how whether kids are willing and able to help someone with a problem. And so what we did. So this is me here in a split screen as a grad student, actually, in Leipzig. What we did there was create a situation where I'm performing a task, like in this case, hanging towels on the clothesline, and then I accidentally drop a clothespin on the floor and can't get it back. So the idea is that there is a difference between what I wanted to happen and what actually happens. An accident happens. And so this is an 18-month-old toddler over here watching while this is happening. And what we find is that in this situation and similar ones, when I accidentally drop something on the ground and can't get it back, kids like this toddler pick it up and hand it back to me. So this indicates that maybe they do that for altruistic reasons because they want to help me with my goal. But there are obviously other kind of alternative explanation you can come up with, like kids are OCD and think that stuff doesn't belong on the floor and kind of want to just pick it up, or more realistically, that they think, oh, that was fun, do that again. So it's some kind of social interaction, and that's why they give it to me. So to get at this, what we have to do in this line of work is to contrast different kinds of conditions to see what might be the motivation. And so in this case, we included a control condition in which I throw the clothespin on the floor on purpose and don't reach for it. So in this case, what happened and what I wanted align, right? So there is no need for help. And as you can see here, very rarely do kids pick up a clothespin and hand it back to me, okay? So it is because of this contrast between an experimental condition in which kids see a situation in which I need help as compared to a control condition in which I don't need help, that kids are reliably performing in a way that we would interpret as helping behaviors, okay? So what we wanted to do is also further probe the kinds of situations kids are able to generate the benefit. So here's another kind of situation that's very different from the first one. So here you see on the left a cabinet with two doors. And first, the kid sees me putting a stack of magazines into the cabinet, close the door, and go to the other end of the room to get more magazines, and this happens. Oh. Oh. Hello? All right. And then again, what we do here is we contrast this experimental condition in which the doors were an obstacle to my goal with a control condition in which I first had, where the kids see me put magazines on top of the cabinet and then close the door. And when I return, I now also bump into the doors, but not because I was trying to put stuff inside, but because I was trying to put stuff on top of the cabinet. And in that case, kids hardly ever or never open the door and hold it open for me, okay? So with this, we can rule out that it's some kind of stimulus enhancement, that just because there is this rattling going on, that they're drawn towards these handles, or that they're somehow reminded of how much fun it is to open doors. No, it seems like their behavior is tailored to my problem of wanting to put stuff inside of the cabinet, okay? So these are just two examples. We have many different versions of this where kids reliably distinguish between a condition in which I need help, where they do help most of the time, as compared to a control condition where no help is needed. One issue is that in these examples, there are very strong cues about the help that is needed, right? I'm reaching for an object or bump into an obstacle, but we as adults at least help in other kinds of situations that are not quite as obvious. So someone, for example, walking along the street and dropping a wallet and just keeps walking, we would hopefully walk behind them and say, hey, you lost your wallet over here, knowing that this is not something that the person could have wanted to happen, and then help what I call proactively. So the examples I show you were reactive helping, responding to a behavior from the person and maybe some kind of communication, as compared to proactively helping, offering help with a person who didn't even realize that there's a problem, okay? So what we did to test this proactive helping is we created a situation where this toddler is playing with a toy in the middle of the room. So this is kind of so that they're always located in the same spot, but also to make it a little bit more costly. And then the experimenter is in front of these tables that you see on the right with the tablecloth in white and red, and she's putting away milk cans into a box. But then one of the milk cans is rolling off the table behind her back without her even noticing that this happens.
And there, put that one here. And then let's see, I've got this the big box. Put that here. And then put that here. And then here's another, let's see, these are the same size. Put that here. And put this one here.
So what we find is that at least starting at 2 years of age, kids reliably help in this kind of situation where the person wanted to clean up stuff and she didn't realize that something fell to the floor, as compared to a control condition in which previously she indicated that she didn't care whether cans were on the floor or on the table. And when the can then rolls off the table, kids also don't care about it, okay? So it's a little bit more difficult. So these basic helping behaviors of stuff being out of reach, for example, we find by 14 to 18 months, kids help. With the slightly more complicated situations where you really have to remember what the person wanted and infer whether help is needed, we find this starting at 2 years of age. So this is showing us at the very least that kids are pretty clever helpers early on, but what really motivates it? And so one thing is that maybe they want to impress their parent or the experimenter. So there's someone in the room, like you saw that, like the parent was sitting in the room in the back of the clothespin task, for example. So maybe they do that for some reputational gain. In this other task I showed you, the parent isn't even in the room anymore. So we kind of ruled that out, but it could be because of the experimenter being there. But the finding is that actually whether the parent is in the room or not really doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter whether the parent is encouraging them to help. And the maybe most stringent test was done by Robert Heppach, now at Oxford University, doing basically the kind of helping studies that I've run here, but now there's a curtain between the child and the experimenter, and they never see each other, not before, not during, not after the helping act, and still kids are helping in this anonymous situation, right? So it really doesn't seem like it's for some reputational gain that kids help. And other studies also show that it takes until like maybe 5 years of age to even for kids to even process that they can get some reputational boost for helping, okay? So the other reason could be that kids think that they get some contingent reward for helping. So we tested that in many studies. But what we find is whether we offer the kid a reward for helping or not, or whether we praise them for helping or not, actually does not induce any kind of helping behavior. So it doesn't make it more or less likely that kids would help in the first place. However, it actually has some influence on future helping for those kids that are already willing to help. And so this is how we tested that. So this is with 20-month-olds. And they were in a first learning phase. So we randomly assigned them to group A. So it's individually tested, but it's the same kind of situation like with this clothespin task, where someone is reaching for an out of reach object, and kids can help, and they don't get any reward for it. No praise, no toy or anything. But kids in the other group, they always get rewarded for helping. So they get a little toy cube every time they help. So the person reaches for the object that they need and is at the same time offering that they can get paid for it, basically. So kids in both conditions learn whether they get a reward or not. And then the critical test, happens later, where the same person is now again in need of help, but is not offering a reward, okay? And what we find is that kids who have never experienced receiving a reward for helping continue to help at a very high rate. And kids who have learned that you can get paid for helping are now less likely to help spontaneously. So what we think is going on here is what's called the over-justification effect, or also called crowding out, that kids are initially intrinsically motivated to help. So they do it because of the action itself, that they think that's kind of the right thing to do. But when now a more salient reward is coming, so now the behavior turns into something different, it's now extrinsically motivated, kids are now less likely to help when this external reward is not forthcoming. Okay, so this is the finding showing us that it's really maybe not about getting a reward. Rewards can actually undermine kids' intrinsic motivation. Another aspect is maybe kids do it because they don't have anything better to do and it's not very effortful. So we tried to test that in the following way. So this on the right, you see an experimenter who's engaged in a task, and she drops her pencil on the ground. But now this 2-year-old on the left is having fun in the ball pool.
Mama, guck, das wird lieb. Na sowas. Na sowas. Na sowas. Ich kann so viel zu Ende schreiben. Deine, ja. Fertig.
All right, so what we find is that kids also help when there is some cost involved, like opportunity cost, that they have to leave a game behind. We also have tasks where they have to climb over multiple obstacles in order to help. So in all these situations, kids continue to help. An important aspect is that they're not oblivious to cost at all. So this is work by Jessica Somerville at University of Toronto, showing that when kids have to help by lifting an object, if it's really heavy, something that they can barely lift as a toddler, they're somewhat less likely to help when it's a light object. So there is some cost-benefit analysis going on, which is important because that's what you should do. But the important thing is that they continue to help at a decent rate when the costs are high. All right. So these are examples of these kinds of helping behaviors. I should also point out that this is very robust. So many studies have replicated this finding from many labs across the world. We've also tested kids in many different parts of the world, some very different from the original studies in Germany and then in the US. And in all these studies, we find that helping behaviors emerge early in childhood. There's some variance in when exactly, and that's also to be expected with any kind of behavior. But the important point is it's really a phenomenon that's emerging early in childhood. So with this in mind, I think we can challenge this idea that we're just born selfish and need to learn how to be altruistic. But the issue with developmental claims like that is always that, well, it took 14 months for this to emerge. And even though certain types of socialization practices, such as internalizing abstract norms, really can't explain it. It seems absurd to think that a 14-month-old would be able to process that. There's always the claim that you can always miss out on something that is emerging really early that we haven't measured or are not aware of that might turn a purely selfish individual into an altruistic one. Okay, so you can always make that claim. Even with like a 2-month-old, you could say, well, it just was fast track, took 2 months, but still. Maybe Mother Nature has not contributed anything to it. So what we can do, and so that's a developmental problem. So with developmental studies alone, we can never really address that. But what we can do is conduct comparative studies with our closest evolutionary relatives, namely chimpanzees and bonobos. We share a last common ancestor with both of these species, extant species that lived 5 to 7 million years ago. So the logic is that if culture and socialization and so forth are necessary prerequisites, we would only find that in humans and not in other apes, because nobody claims that they have norm acquisition and parents teaching their offspring how to behave and how not to behave. Okay, but what we find is, and this was a major surprise to us, we originally did not expect that at all, is that chimpanzees also show these early helping behaviors, and it's also not driven by rewards. They show it towards humans, they show it towards conspecifics. They don't show these proactive helping behaviors that I showed you. So there's stuff that's a bit more cognitive complex or maybe requires extra motivation isn't there. But if a recipient is really communicating the need for help, they're willing to do that. And a work by Yingji Tan and colleagues in Brian Hare's lab testing bonobos also finds that they're willing to help in these kinds of situations. So what this indicates to us is that maybe the last common ancestors of human and genus Pan already possessed some of these altruistic inclinations to help others, and socialization, human unique socialization practices are not necessary for these behaviors to emerge. All right, so that's helping as an ability to altruistically help someone else in need. But as at my first slide, I also indicated that collaboration is important, where people form teams to gain some mutualistic benefit. So how does that emerge? So I'm going to be brief about this one, and just explain the basic idea behind that. So one task that has been used extensively with non-human primates is this task. Is called the Hirata apparatus because Satoshi Hirata from Kyoto University developed it. And it was Alicia Millis, a colleague of mine now at UCL, who has run many, many studies with this apparatus and fine-tuning it. So the basic idea is that you have two chimps that sit in front of a large board you see here that has yummy food on it, like banana slices in this case. But the only way for them to get it is that both pull this rope at the same time, because it's just long. It's not long enough for one chimp to reach both ends and pull at the same time, despite their long arms. So they really have to collaborate to engage on that task. And so Alicia has shown that chimps are really good at that. So they learn very quickly how to solve this task. They know when they can do it alone. They know when they have to open a door to get another chimp in and so forth. So they're really good at coordinating that. And we adapted that for kids. So this is the same basic task. The difference is that instead of locking up the children, we locked up the rewards in this transparent box, but it's the same kind of function that they have to pull at the same time to get to the reward. So they pull them closer in front of a little window that is kind of, you see this white thing that's kind of a handle, and right underneath they can then obtain gummy bears or some other kind of, or stickers or some kind of reward that we put there. Okay, so this ability emerges around 2 to 3 years of age in kids. But I wanted to use this to test to what extent kids distribute benefit. So how do they distribute the benefit they get from these rewards? And so this is a study that was conducted by my grad student Katharina Hamann, where we have this apparatus. It's a little bit different, where now they move this block forward. So they need to pull these two ropes in order to move a block forward that then knocks over these blue marbles, okay? And so we know that kids at 2 years can do this really well. They know how to coordinate, wait for the other, because if you don't wait, you have a rope, but you don't have the marbles. But the question is, what do they do if the rewards are distributed equally or versus unequally? So we have a collaboration condition where they have to work together to obtain the rewards, and one kid ends up with 3 of the marbles on the left, and the kid on the right ends up only with 1 marble. We contrast this with a parallel work condition. So this is where both kids have to work, but they work individually, right? You can see that this block is split. So each one, the person on the left has a block to pull, and the person on the right has a block to pull. So the question is now whether they differentiate between a situation where they had to collaborate towards these marbles, or they each one individually work towards obtaining them. And also the outcome is the same, where the person on the left gets 3, the person on the right gets 1. Obviously, this is counterbalanced across trials. And then we have a no work condition in which they just come into the room, and on one side are 3, on the other side are 1. So no work is needed whatsoever. Okay, so here is an illustration of this with 2 kids. And what we find is that at age 2, kids are able to collaborate, so they obtain these marbles, but they just leave it as it is. So when one ends up with 3 and the other one with 1, they just leave it as is. However, by age 3, they are most likely to make things equal, as we could see in this example, when they worked towards this goal collaboratively. So the one would hand over the extra marble to the other one, or let the other one have that one, to create an equal split. You see also a little bit, so 2-year-olds accept any allocation, and 3-year-olds are more likely to rectify an unequal allocation after collaboration. There's also kind of an intermediate for parallel work. So there's also an acknowledgement of merit in terms of some individual task, and there are future studies that show that that's a real thing, so that kids also take that into account. But collaboration really has a special status, right? So when we work for this together, kids are more insisting on wanting things to be exactly equal, all right? So this is what's emerging at 3 years of age. So we have this lag that actually in the 2nd year of life, and certainly by 2 years of age, kids are able to collaborate in these kinds of tasks, but they don't yet distribute the benefit in a fair manner. But at around age 3, they do. And that seems to be something that's unique to humans, because in chimpanzees, we find that they're able to collaborate in this way, but and they also share sometimes when one gets more than the other, but whether they collaborated towards that task or did it individually just has absolutely no effect. Okay, so the claim then is that in kids, as in human kids, we develop these kinds of fairness norms to make collaboration a thing that is actually mutualistically beneficial and makes sense over the long term to engage in it, because we all get what we deserve. All right. Okay, so that's one way of solving this problem of how to distribute benefit. And now let's move to another one that is also quite effective and well known to be important in adults, at least. So the idea behind reciprocity is fairly simple, right? That if blue cooperates with green, that's a good thing as long as green is also cooperating with blue at some later point in time, right? So if I pay for coffee today and then I forget my wallet tomorrow, and I can hope that you will pay for my coffee then, right? So then cooperation is a viable strategy to do. But the issue is that this we need to be able to think about whether cooperation is actually a viable strategy, because if we remember from past interactions that green was actually never helpful, so maybe I really shouldn't help back, right, or share back. So I would call that retrospective reciprocity. But interestingly, we also think about the future. Is there a probability, or how high is the probability that the other one is going to share back with me? So that's what I call prospective reciprocity. So now I want to show you some studies where we tested retrospective and prospective reciprocity respectively. What we do is we use this zigzag ramp. So it's where you have a little golf ball or some ball that you can put through the funnel. It rolls down. It's a lot of fun to watch and hear because there's a jingle box inside, but then the resource is gone, right? So it's you need more to keep playing. And then we have the child and a partner, and in one case, while the child has run out of balls, the cooperator still has some and shares with the child. And then we measure whether the child would share back at some later event where now this green guy runs out of marbles and the child still has some left, right? So the question is, will they share with the cooperator as compared to kids interacting with a defector? So same thing, the kids runs out of marbles, the red guy still has some marbles left, but is now not sharing with the child. Will the child share back or not at some later encounter where the defector, the red guy, is now has run out of balls and needs some sharing, right? Okay, so here is the result we get for this retrospective reciprocity. 2.5-year-olds are completely unaffected by prior partner behavior. So they're as likely to share if the partner has shared with them as they are to share with someone who has not shared with them. And it's only around 3.5 years of age that kids differentiate. So there they become more selective and continue to share with the cooperator, and are less likely to do that with a defector. Again, so this again shows that it takes some time for kids to move out of this naive phase of thinking it's a good thing to share, to differentiate between situations where it pays off or versus situations where you're dealing with a free rider. So what about prospective reciprocity? So again, the idea, kids imagining being able to anticipate how someone will share with them in the future. And so the way we did that is that it's the same basic idea that the child is interacting with a partner, and there are these jingle boxes. So at table 1, the situation is that there is the regular jingle box. So you do want to play it, but the real exciting game is at table 2. And the tricky part is that the child can decide how many of these balls to keep, so they get 5 balls, and how many to give to the other. So imagine the child is now sharing 1 marble. Then they move to table 2, and the child knows that the partner has control over the 5 marbles on the other table, on table 2. And so what we do is that the partner always plays tit for tat. So it's always sharing how much the child shared, right? So in this case, it pays off to give at least some balls away because then you get balls back and can play the fun game and not just watch the other one play the fun game and you just are bored, okay? And the control condition is that the same thing happens at table 2, but the child knows that at table 2, it's not the partner who decides how these resources are being distributed, but it's a card facing down that says what should happen, okay? So that, for example, then it's revealed that the kid would get 3 and the other one get 2. So they don't know how much it is, but they know that they don't have control. No one has control over what the distribution is going to be at table 2. All right. So what we find is that 3-year-olds are not yet differentiating. So whether they are in the experimental or control condition, they're rarely are sharing in this reciprocal fashion. However, at 4 and 5 years of age, you see that they are over trials and differentiating. So at the beginning, they're kind of a mid-range of sharing maybe one marble, but when they learn that through experience that the other one is playing tit for tat, kids in the experimental condition become more and more likely to share with the other person. Okay, so this is interesting because it shows that kids are able to anticipate or learn whether they are in a situation of future reciprocation or not. And we also have actually a whole battery of tests of their cognitive abilities and find that, in fact, it is kids' ability to think about the future and the ability to delay gratification that is predictive of this kinds of sharing behaviors. So kids who are better able to plan for the future and kids who are better able to delay gratification are the ones to show a stronger effect of this prospective reciprocity. Okay, and now I want to give another example of this prospective reciprocity, because what I showed you here is what's often called like a partner control model, where you're stuck with one partner and all that happens is whether that one is sharing with you or not. But there are also partner choice models. So what can happen is that in the future, someone is choosing whether to cooperate with you or with someone else, for example. So we wanted to test that in the situation. So the idea being that the kid, the self here in blue, is making the decision whether to cooperate with the other or not, knowing that green in the future can choose to cooperate with the child or with someone else, right? So this is maybe a bit more complex situation to think about how someone else will treat them over someone else. And so this is how we set this up. So we have a game owner. This is an experimenter here in green who has a game like a maze, where the kids learn that it's a 2-player game where the game owner can choose who to play this game with. And they announce that they're either going to choose the child or they're going to choose this other person, what we now call the competitor, not in front of the child, obviously. But before that happens, both the competitor and the child can choose what of 2 resources to share with the game owner. So there's an attractive resource like a fancy sticker versus like a Post-it note, something really lame. Then the question is now whether kids will be more likely to share the fancy object with the game owner and keep the lame one for themselves in a condition where the game owner says, this is a 2-player game and I'm going to choose someone to play with, as compared to a control condition where the game owner says, I'm going to play this game. It's a 1-player game. I'm going to play that by myself later. So there's no point in kind of bribing that person because it can't change anything about what the child will be able to do in the future. Okay, so we tested 3, 5, and 7-year-olds. Here are, again, the 2 conditions, all between subject. The experimental condition, the game owner chooses a partner, and the control condition, the game owner plays alone. And our dependent variable, what we measure is whether the child is sharing the attractive over the unattractive object. So they have to choose whether they share the one thing or the other thing. And we also rig it such that the competitor always chooses the opposite. So that means that there's never a tie. And then the game owner, chooses, is corruptible, is corrupt, and chooses the one that has given them the better sticker. And so what we find is that here, this is 7-year-olds, they pick up on this immediately. So from trial 1, where they haven't even experienced how these things play out exactly, they're more likely to give the fancy sticker, or we have actually a bunch of different kinds of objects, to the person over the lame object. And this increases over trials. So you see trials 1 through 4 here, but you see that already in trial 1, there is a significant difference. 5-year-olds are also picking up on this, but it takes them a little longer. So in the first trial, they're as likely to give something in the experimental and control. But once they see that the one who has been chosen, who was bribing basically will be chosen, then they also increase their sharing. And the youngest ones, the 3-year-olds, are not picking up on this at all. So they tend to keep the fancy object for themselves, okay? So what this tells us is that basically, I thought this maybe is interesting for your institute looking at crime, that bribery and corruption is fairly early emerging as well, but not yet in toddlers. All right, so this is reciprocity, or the different forms of reciprocity. And so the last thing I want to show you is what we find about third-party punishment. So all the examples I've gave you so far about are dyadic situations, right, where two individuals have to kind of regulate cooperation amongst themselves. But what happens when there's a third party involved? Are they willing to intervene against people who are not cooperative with each other? So that's why it's called third-party punishment, because at least in adults, people tend to punish those that are not fair, for example. So what we do in these studies with kids, this is often done in person or virtually, so many variations on this basic paradigm, where we have a decider, like in this case, the red guy, who symbolizes a child. So for example, in a computer game, we say you're the red avatar and you're playing with blue, who is another child in another, who's logged into the computer and plays somewhere else. And then you can split up. Sorry, I mixed this up. So red is one child who is somewhere else and is playing the game, and blue is another child who is playing somewhere else, and you are purple here in this case, and you can decide what to do about this. So red is, for example, splitting things equally, or is selfish, keeping all to themselves, or is kind of in between, is keeping most for themselves and giving a little bit away. But then the child here in purple can decide whether to sacrifice one of their own tokens. So this is kind of like money. They can exchange that for prizes later, can pay in order to, for example, take away everything from a selfish individual, right? So they basically intervene and break the deal, say nobody gets anything if this happens, okay? And so what we find in this basic paradigm is that kids are more likely to intervene when someone is sharing selfishly, like keeps everything for themselves in this case, than fairly, creates an equal split. So we have 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, and the bars show now the probability of rejecting that. In order to do that, they, in this condition, actually don't have to pay anything. So they could just decide whether they say, okay, that's okay, so everybody gets what they want, what red shared, or they say, no deal, nobody gets anything. And so here we see a differentiation where clearly by 6 years of age, kids are more likely to intervene against a selfish allocation than a fair allocation. And 5-year-olds are not there yet. And importantly, they do that also in a condition where it's actually costly. So here is like what I showed you in the slide before. The kid has to sacrifice one of their own tokens in order to intervene against the allocation. So you see again the differentiation. 5-year-olds don't do it yet, although they're trending in the right direction. But by 6 years of age, they do that. You see also an overall decline in their rate of intervention, which is important because it shows us that they view it as costly, right? So they're less willing to intervene when they have to sacrifice something by themselves, but they still do it reliably more in the selfish than the control condition, okay? So this is the basic paradigm. And so what we find here with this paradigm in summary is that children pay a cost to punish selfish individuals without tangible current or future benefit to the self. So we have several variations where they do or do not interact with the person they've kind of protected from selfishness, or they do or do not interact with the person they are punishing, but that does not seem to influence their intervention. They do it in anonymous interactions with absent peers, so it's not only when someone else can see when the other person can see that they were helpful towards them by kind of protecting them against selfish individuals. Importantly, this punishment is not willy-nilly. It is really aimed at creating equality. So the degree of punishment, so how likely they are to punish and how much they punish, is calibrated to the degree of inequality. So they're much more likely to punish if someone wants to keep everything for themselves versus most of it for themselves. And in that case, they often punish exactly so that they can create exact equality. So more rejection of selfish than generous unequal allocation, and creating things to make them equal. Somewhat interesting is that when we manipulate whether the agent has willingly acted selfishly versus it was kind of a random draw and just ended up with more, this doesn't matter too much for the kids. So they seem to be very outcome focused. So they really want things to be equal, whether this was now generated by some selfish divider or it was just a random draw that created an unequal outcome. So they seem to be much more focused on outcome than on intent. And then developmentally, this is something that's emerging in middle childhood. So this is starting around 6 years of age, at least in the samples that we tested in the US. And then we find also in cross-cultural studies that it increases across age, or across diverse cultural groups. So we test kids in Canada, India, Peru, Uganda, US, and also Vanuatu. So in all these cases, we find that a third-party punishment is increasing with some variation in when it is happening. So the 6 years is kind of the youngest. So it happens slightly later in certain cultures, but importantly, it's increasing over childhood. Okay, so this is the development of third-party punishment as an important means of making sure that cooperation happens, not just between me and you, but between people of our group more generally. So to what extent do we find something like that in chimpanzees and bonobos? And so the finding is that, so third-party punishment, but also reciprocity as second-party punishment. So we find that there are some limited forms of reciprocity. So when people have run studies on reciprocity, you see more of this retrospective than prospective kind of reciprocity. So that chimps, for example, are less likely to cooperate with someone with whom they've had negative experiences over a longer period of time, but they're not calculating about how likely it is that someone else will reciprocate with them in the future. And more generally, it seems to be more affect-based. So it's more about, do we get along? Like, does it feel right? As compared to really keeping track of exactly the amount given and the amount shared, and so forth. So this is a finding by Brosnan and Duval and other people. Skino and Areli, this is like a meta-analysis. So there's a lot of data on this that converges on this finding. So inequity version I called it an inequity version here, but that's basically fairness, creating equality, where we find that also chimps care about fairness to some extent, maybe, but it's only about me getting less than you that chimps seem to care about. They're never really doing anything about when they get more than someone else. And as I also mentioned earlier, there's no link between collaboration and making things equal. So this seems to be something that we find only in humans. And then with regard to punishment, when you look at chimps, you don't see this third-party punishment that I explained to you in the studies with kids. They do sometimes punish at cost to themselves, someone who kind of screws them over. So there's really some cool studies by Keith Jensen where, for example, another chimp is stealing a tray of yummy nuts and fruits from them. Then they rather make the table collapse, the tray fall to the ground, and the keeper swipe up all the yummy stuff and throw it in the trash, than them letting the thief eat their food, basically. So this is second-party punishment, but you don't find third-party punishment in in chimps. And another feature is also that a self-maximization is more important for them over punishment. So when punishment is made really costly, chimps are not doing that, whereas kids, as we saw, they're willing to do it. They're sacrificing their own resources in order to prevent others, prevent a selfish individual to have more than someone else. Okay, so the point is that this is third-party punishment and reciprocity are important aspects of human cooperation that allow us to solve this problem of how to distribute benefit in dyadic and also triadic contexts. But this is not something that we find in chimpanzees to the same extent. So while chimpanzees might have some of the abilities to generate benefit that allows them to cooperate in certain kinds of situations, they haven't really figured out haven't figured out ways of making sure that things are distributed in a way that makes cooperation a viable strategy over the long term across many different kinds of situations, something that kids learn fairly quickly. So I just, want to point out two papers maybe that are particularly helpful. So this general framework and the review of all the available evidence about children is summarized in an article I wrote for Annual Review of Psychology, How Children Solve the Two Challenges of Cooperation. And then the second thing about this change in reciprocity, we have a recent paper by Sebastian Grüneisen. He's now a professor at University Leipzig, the development of prosocial behavior, where we argue that kids early on are maybe engaging in some sympathy-based cooperation, and then it's only later that it can become strategic for this future reciprocity or bribing other individuals. So with that, I want to conclude, but also thank all my collaborators. Obviously, it's always a team of people that has worked with this, my co-authors and my current lab members here at the University of Michigan. Thank you very much.